Hello, welcome to this episode of Behind the Book. Today we're talking to Sandy Mamoli and David Mole about their book, Creating Great Teams, which actually comes with a really interesting concept, the idea that teams should select themselves. And we're going to be talking a lot about that over the next few minutes. But before we do, could you guys introduce yourselves? Maybe Sandy?
Yes. Hello. And first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I love being on this podcast. My name is Sandy, and I have been in the agile world for the last 23 years. And over the course of my career, I have been working with teams. And one of the observations I made was that creating high performance teams, it is an absolute boost if people work on what they want to work on and who they want to work with. And this is where self-selection comes in.
Sounds good to me. David?
Awesome. Hi, Dave. Yeah, thanks for having us on. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name's David, and I'm a coach and facilitator based in New Zealand. And I've been working with Sandy for the last 10 years or more, actually, on all things agile and teams. And as Sandy said, one of the things we've discovered along the way is our role, if nothing else, is a lot easier as a coach when people have chosen their own team. And we'd love to chat to you about some of our thoughts around that.
I'm looking forward to that. Before we start, though, Sandy, 23 years in Agile must mean that you were there, like, standing outside the door at Snowbird, listening in on what we were doing. What have you, just background here, what changes have you seen, good and bad, in agility over that time?
That's a great question. First of all, let me acknowledge my lack of math skills. I was going 23, but so I started in 2002 working agile. So that
Yeah,
yeah
that's
is
good.
about
That's
that's
going
actually
good.
okay. Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
fast calculation right there. Phew.
yeah. Good job.
Um, yes. Okay, cool. Changes I've seen is going, and this is changes I've been through myself, and that is going from having one really closely knit team delivering something that's really valuable and having a really big technical focus, and going from there to, and I myself have been then crashing into the boundaries of organizations
Mm,
where it's like this is a really cool thing we have, but it is not enough. There's adjacent areas where we need to fix or figure out how we collaborate. So personally, I crashed into those boundaries and started working with widening the pockets of influence that I had. So how do we actually collaborate if we're more than one or two or five teams? And how do we collaborate if we're an entire organization? So I moved from just having the core of Agile to almost like organizational agility or business agility, whatever buzzword you want to use right now.
and presumably that experience plays directly into the team formation stuff as well, in the same kind of resistance you might get to agility or to play into the team idea as well.
Absolutely. Both resistance, but also just having a different level of abstraction or a different horizon of a bigger view of more of a helicopter view of how things could work rather than how I started out with just having a very small team focused view and a technical view because my background is actually technical.
Cool. So I want to come back to that because this is something that the kind of impedance and mismatch between teams and their organizations is something which is near and dear to my heart. And I'd love to dig into that in a second. But before we do that, can you take us back to, I guess, 10 years ago? I'm not very good at math either. And the kind of origin story of how this process started.
So yeah, the origin story, and we are going back to about 2013 when David and I were working with New Zealand's biggest e-commerce company, Trade Me, and think the New Zealand version of eBay. And we were in the process of creating teams, and David is going to tell you a bit more about what was going on there. But I do remember while we were in this process of putting people into different teams, we had a ship it day. And if anyone doesn't know what ship it day is, it's ship something within 24 hours, figure out what you want to work on, and get a group of people together to get it done. And I've realized what people were doing was choose their own team and choose their own work. And the team formation was really amazing. Like nobody was putting themselves on two teams, nobody was worried about utilization or anything like that. And it was my first shipper day, and I thought this was a really, really cool experience because I saw both what people got out, but also like the joy and the passion and the excitement of everyone. And I got home, I remember that like it was yesterday. I got home and I started blogging about the experience. And then I thought, it's just a real shame that we can't do this every day. Too bad. And then it totally hit me. I thought, wow, what's wrong with me? Who says we can't do this? What if I just tried to make this happen? What if we can? What if we could? And I thought I didn't know how and how this was going to end, and if it was realistic, I just knew there was something and we needed to do it. So I just got on my bike and I rode to work, and I went up to David, who was the head of project management on the time. So I got off my bike, found David, and got David, this is what we need to do.
Yeah. And go ahead. I think sometimes there's a coincidence factor here. There's definitely a timing factor. But at the time, I was a middle manager in the organization. I think that's the best way of saying it. And that meant that part of my role and the team I was involved in was team selection. As what middle managers spent a lot of time on was placing people into teams. Mm-hmm. And we had the kind of spreadsheet that I've seen in a lot of organizations now, which is messy. There are about 63 different versions. We try color coding, and it's essentially a tool to move people around like chess pieces. And when Sandy rode in on her bike, I was just coming out of a very long, unproductive discussion around how we would move people around from a managerial selection point of view. We'll move Brian to this team. We'll move Bob to that team. Oh, no, that won't work for this reason. Let's revisit that. And I really like the idea that good things come after frustration. Like you have to be confused to learn something. I think you have to be frustrated to try something a bit different and high impact like this. So Sandy came back in, her suggestion of self-selection didn't seem that crazy when you saw what the management selection side actually looked like, right. Which was, to be honest, quite tiring and not productive at all. So Sandy said, what about if we just let people choose their own teams and who they work with and what they work on? And I think I reacted like everybody reacts to that idea in the first instance, which is to say, that's crazy. Can I please go back to my spreadsheet because I've got people to move around? Thank you very much. But Sandy being Sandy, she's quite persistent. I don't know if you've had it out yet. And really, I think thought and knew she was onto something. And between the two of us, we wanted to do this. We thought it would be better. But at that stage, it was just a hypothesis. It was just a best guess. We couldn't find anyone who'd done it before. But it gave us something really aspirational to go after, this idea of letting people choose their own teams.
So then, having said, okay, this is worth trying, presumably you did not shut the entire company down and then the next day say, okay, everybody pick your friends. There must have been some process that you went through to manage this in a kind of controlled way.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's how we managed our worries and anxiety is to control the things we could control, which was the facilitated process where we would kind of let people choose their teams. Because you're right, if you just said to everyone, hey, go over there, pick who you want to work with, I think you would get chaos. But I think what we've come up with is a method and a facilitated structure where you can actually do this in a really nice way that people enjoy and actually come out of it quite buzzing with after the experience. So using our agile experience, the worst thing we could do is shut the company down and say, hey, we've got this big bang way that everybody's going to choose their teams. And instead we just came up with the smallest where we could test our idea, as it was at that time, which was a small trial in one of our satellite offices in Auckland, New Zealand, where we could get a group of 20-ish people to select into 3 teams. And the way we would have done that is with our spreadsheet of doom. And the way we did do it was almost like a marketplace where we were able to explain what teams were needed by the organization, explain the structure that we could follow to choose those teams, and essentially hand that autonomy over to the people involved and test out that idea.
So I got to say, I know you wouldn't know this to look at me, but I'm not the sporting type. And so one of my biggest memories of team selection is being the last person in line at school sports. Is that not a phenomena that you see in this kind of environment?
One, no, it's not. But I'm so surprised how traumatized people are about that experience. It seems like everyone has had the experience of being there, not being picked. And on behalf of all the other children, I want to apologize.
Too late, too late. I've been scarred for life. Too
Because
late.
I've been picking the people. But now we're all grown ups and have moved on. This is totally not what is happening. There is no picking someone else. Self-selection works the other way around. So flip it on its head. You have agency. You are in charge. You put yourself where you want to be. No one is picking you. So you see there's a gap in a team, or there's something you really want to do, some people you want to work with, a project or a product you want to work on. Then you take your photo during self-selection event and put it in the team where you want to be.
But if a team is oversubscribed, then
Yep.
doesn't popularity come into play again?
Surprisingly, it's not popularity because first of all, this is not a just me, and it's also not a everyone gets exactly the team they want. This is putting a problem that is how do we organize ourselves in the best possible way to the group of people who are closest to the problem, who can solve a problem together. And in order to do that, we ask people to put themselves where they think they want to be. And mostly people don't have just one first choice. Would be happy to work with on several different teams. Maybe on the second choice, they would be happy in different constellations. And the thing that we're asking is just that people have conversations and figure out together which combination will work for each team to reach their purpose and to do great work. And I've never ever seen that scenario where there's this person that nobody likes, that
Ah,
is all alone. We take that into consideration. Like one, it doesn't happen. Two, if there are people who really don't know where they want to put themselves, they might be a bit shy, they might not want to do this, or they're maybe on day one in the company, so they have absolutely no idea. We usually have an area where people can go and put their phone and go, "Hey, approach me. I'm ready to be in a squad." So that is also an option for people.
so I guess then the assumption behind this is that what's good for the individual ends up being good for the company.
Yes.
But we do know people are trading those two things off in their mind as they make the decision. And one of the things we did actually was in the first one, we put up a giant banner that said, "Do what's best for the company," just as a very visual reminder of that and the fact you are trading off. Where can you add the most value? Where are you going to learn and grow the most? And what's best for the company? Because there will be some people who can go exactly where they want, and there'll be others who have to compromise or go to their second choice or support their colleagues in solving the problem. And like Sandy said, the best way to think of this is we're solving the puzzle together rather than individually choosing which team to join in. And that's one of the reasons we discounted the idea of people simply writing down or emailing in, "I want to be in Team X." And then everyone would send those emails in, and they might have a first choice and a second choice. But we didn't want that. we wanted people to solve it together. We wanted to get people together and go, here's the problem we need to solve as a company. We need these teams in order to deliver these outcomes. That's what we know we need to do. And then saying, right, how are we going to organize ourselves to do that? And it's not a where do you want to go question. It's a how do we place ourselves best today, based on what we know, and we might change it later, but today, where should we sit? And there is that underlying assumption that people will act selfishly, and people raise that a lot with us when we have the idea. They're like, "Whoa, you must be crazy because you're just going to get one really popular team and one really unpopular team." And before we'd done this a few times, we had that fear too, or at least lots of people had told us that fear. But you know what? When you pitch this well, when you explain the concept, when we explain why we're doing it in this way, the way people show up has just blown me and Sandy away every single time. They show up incredibly well. They compromise their own interests in some cases. They trade off the benefits and the pros and cons and come up with a solution together. And sometimes they'll ask us, it's really interesting, they'll be midway through the self-selection, like, Sandy, David, what should we do? Should I be in this team or should I go over there? And obviously we've both been coaching long enough to not answer that question and to put back on them. So it's really fascinating and quite rewarding and nice to see, actually, just that people don't act in a selfish manner when you... And this is what's, I think, the most important part of the book is to say, here's a way you can do this and here's a way you can set up the conversation so that people do show up in that really positive way. And here's the kind of structure and messaging that might help with that.
Yeah. And there's two things that come to mind for me. And one is if we treat people like responsible adults, they will act like responsible adults. They do.
Yeah.
And the other thing that comes to mind is that I have the opposite background of you, David, because my background is actually professional sports. And one of the things that we are really, really keen on is to focus on progress over perfection. So doing a self-selection, we know we're not going to get perfection. But we also know management selection won't give us perfection. So if we have an imperfect result, I would much rather have trusted adults who are responsible, who have agency, and ask them to solve that problem together rather than just dividing the thinking from the doing and having managers decide and tell people what to do and where to go.
Does that imply that this will only work in a relatively high-functioning company?
I think we have evidence now that doesn't need to be the case. I think I thought that a few years ago, and you think we did version 1 of the book 10 years ago, and we've done the more recent one now where we've looked much wider and we've got case studies from all different types of organization. What we had at TradeMe 12 years ago now was that kind of high-functioning, high-performing company. So it's a nice bright spot to test out our ideas. I mean, we could have come away with that saying, okay, so it works if you've got all these preconditions in place. But what we've seen since is no matter the agile method you're using, the structure you've got, the levels of hierarchy maybe, I'm not suggesting this works in every single organization, but I think our understanding of the types of organization it could work has really grown. We think the net can be cast a lot wider now, and that's just because we've seen it happen and we've seen the results, and we've helped facilitate some of those events. The level of skepticism can be higher in some of those organizations, but the result can still be positive.
Sorry, I think what changes is the starting point for organizations. Like some of them are slightly dysfunctional. Some of them have people not used to being allowed to solve problems. And that is a very different starting point from a highly functional organization where people are used to having responsibility. And that is up to us as coaches and facilitator to meet people where they're at. And it is more prep, it is more work or a different kind of work, depending on where the starting point is. But I've seen, like David said, seen it work in so many different organizations that I'm that I know it can work in most places.
I mean, one of the reasons I asked the question is that typically a dysfunctional organization is caused by a dysfunctional management layer. And coming back to the conversation we're having at the very beginning, I would imagine that convincing a dysfunctional management layer to give up some of their authority is not easy.
No, it is absolutely not easy. I find that like the way to talk to management is about the potential benefits and the risks. And first of all, the risk is low. If you do this and it doesn't work out, there's always management selection. You might have wasted a day and go, cool, this is not working. We do what we've always done. So it's relatively low risk. And then on the other hand, you have the potential benefits. If you let people do this, the teams will perform higher. And we have evidence that this is the case. And they perform higher because they make things work. And they make things work because they put themselves in that team. So they are putting more effort into making that team work. And as a last thing, as a manager, at least you don't have all those people coming to you whinging about they don't want to be on this team because they've
Right.
done it to themselves.
Do you know that the reduction in whinging is a real thing and a real number that gets reduced through self-selection? The amount people moan about their teammates or the thing that they said yesterday, or the amount of times people escalate up through an organization in one of those horrible ways that goes through 3 levels and comes back down a different 3 levels. It reduces, like Sandy said, because people have been involved in the choice. So we don't know, but what we think is going on in their head is, that is really annoying what that person did, but rather than escalate it through my manager and complain about how I ended up in this team, I feel ownership of that decision, so I'm going to sort it out. And they do, between themselves, without that kind of hierarchical nonsense. So, reduction in whinging is not a normal measure that you might have in an organization, but it's a good one, and we've seen real positive things there.
My guess is there is a direct correlation between, or negative correlation between whinging and performance. So
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Yeah.
I would imagine also that when you're in a situation where you're assigned to a team seemingly through act of God, then you must feel a degree of helplessness in terms of this is where I am. Lord knows what's going to happen next time. I may end up on something even worse, Whereas in a self-selecting team, then you know that there will be a horizon where you can actually change what's going on. So you don't feel that desperation of I'm stuck here for life.
I think the feeling of helplessness is a bit like software estimates. If someone else makes the estimate and gives me a deadline, I feel way less bought into it or committed and a lot more resentful. And I think the same principle applies to self-selection. First of all, we repeat self-selection. It's not a do it once and then teams never ever change, because that also is not good for team performance. So most companies that we know and do it well repeat self-selection roughly every 6 months. And that does not mean tear everything apart, but it means giving people the opportunity to change if they want to.
So that answers another question I had is you don't have to synchronize the finish of all the projects in order to have another self-selection round.
No,
Okay.
you don't. But that being said, if you find yourself on a team and you find you really made a mistake and it is absolutely horrible and you hate this, then the first question we ask is, can you make this work? And if you really, really can't, then of course we will help you find a different team and make those changes. It can happen.
How about remote teams?
I think,
How does that work?
yeah, there's something that maybe surprised us and pleased us. So the first efforts at self-selection were in person, very much. We emphasised the need and want to get people physically in a room so that they could be part of the decision making. And I think that helped us perfect the process and the method that we wanted to do. And somewhere along the way, we started doing this remotely. And of course, around 2020, there was a very big need to do this remotely that we all experienced. So anyone who had this in mind or wanted to do it now didn't have a choice anymore. They had to do it remotely. And what we've seen and what we've built, I think, is that the method translates really, really nicely. In fact, it translates so nicely to doing this remotely now. I'm not sure which one I would pick if I was given the option tomorrow. I think there's
Really?
benefits to doing this remotely. You get a really focused, nice conversation with everyone's attention focused on maybe the visual board that you're using to do that. But you sometimes lose people in a room because they're off, oh no, there's something over there, and you lose their attention slightly. So there are pros and cons, of course, but we've seen now and again case studies in the book, in the second version, which boosts our confidence when we talk about this, to say that it can absolutely work remotely as well, and we can still embody the idea that sits behind self-selection of choosing your own team, if you happen to be working for a remote company or even just doing the selection remotely.
So, I've read your book twice now, and one of the things that struck me the second time through is when you were talking about kind of like the overall process of the day. You were talking about people declaring their skill set in various different ways. And one of the things that struck me about that is, isn't there a danger of that becoming kind of a little bit regressive in that this is my skill and that's what I get chosen for, and I'm never going to break out and do something different?
I would like to take you back to the you're not being chosen for something, you choose
Okay.
something. So if you want to stay with your skill, that is totally fine. But if you bring more to the table, that's even better. And we have guidelines for people for how we recommend they choose their team. And that is how can how can I contribute? What do I bring? What can I learn? Because we all want to grow and learn. What can I learn? And what can I teach? And does it work for the company? So those four questions we want people to consider before making a choice. And I hope, or I know if people do that, they won't be stuck in that one specialty. And if they are, then we can help them as an organization. We will help people becoming unstuck. And I think that's the same with self-selection or management selection. In fact, with self-selection, it would surface your desire to learn new things and do additional things and not be stuck in your role.
Makes sense. Do you ever, or have you ever experimented with adding a degree of randomization to it?
No, but that's a brilliant idea.
Do you mean selecting teams on people's behalf and just place?
I was thinking like you let the team select to a certain level and then randomly assign the rest, or you let them select all the way and then they have to they have to swap one person with another team.
It'd be great fun, I think, because personally I would participate because there will be probably some kind of skill gap in many teams. And I would see that skill gap as an opportunity for everyone else to learn something new. So I think it'd be a cool experiment. And again, I would probably start with a Shepherd Day or something smaller to try it out, and then
Yeah,
see if it could work in real life.
because it seems to me that what you're doing in a way is a kind of optimization problem where you take all the pieces and you have to try and fit them into the various containers. You take all the pieces and you shake and shake and shake and shake, and then pieces drop into where they should be. It's a bit like when you anneal metal, right? You heat it up to the point where it gets chaotic, and then you let it cool down, and it cools down with the crystals are smaller and it's more malleable and everything else. And it just struck me that one of the ways of doing that is to heat the room up, if you like, and make things move around a bit. As once they've settled, unsettle them, and then see what happens. But
Yeah, I think you're on something there. And what it's reminding me of is the latter part of the selection process, because I think the first part is heating the room up, like you say. So it's setting the tone, letting people have that first choice, seeing where they gravitate towards, where the big problems are we might need to solve. That's almost the easy bit. You start with a blank canvas, allow people to pick where they might want to be, And usually if you've got 10 teams to choose, 8 of them may have formed through a couple of iterations. But we're very agile in our approach to this. I hope you see that shining through. And it relates to exactly what you signed all those years ago, that we're trying to have a first best guess at what it should look like, and then we get feedback and we iterate on that process. And we're really choosing teams in the same way here. But when you get towards the end of that, and I think this is where what you're talking about comes really into play, is you're very unlikely to get perfect teams. It'd be really unlikely that you need 10 teams and you happen to have the exact group of people who will form into those 10. So when you get to the last part and the last few teams, you might have some gnarly bits, some gaps that may still need filling, or 2 people who really need to have a difficult decision about where they land, maybe. And it's there where people usually ask us for help. Where should we go? And we have to say no, because that would remove the self part of self-selection. But we can play with ideas at that point. And like you're saying, randomization would be a great addition to say, well, what if we did it this way or that way? Or what if we both went over here instead of over there? So you can kind of play through scenarios randomly or in any other way. But the key for us, and I think this is the principle we won't let go of, is that everybody ultimately has made the decision themselves at the end of the day. Because that is the single thing which seems to have this brilliant and long-term effect afterwards. So even if we did it randomly, I would still say you now choose whether you stick with that selection or move. Just to avoid us, and there's a pitfall here of self-selection where it's self-selection up front, but actually behind that is managers moving pieces around still. And I think that's worse than managerial selection, because then you've got a scenario where we're pretending it's autonomy and actually it's managers making the call. And we do see that try and creep in. And when we facilitate, that's one of the things we kind of have to hold off at the door, is the idea that it's self-selection up to a point, and then someone is going to still make the decision. And I think if you do, you undermine everything else. So
that must require tremendous patience on your part.
Yes.
Yep.
Sometimes.
Do you find that companies that use this technique have better employee retention?
We believe so, anecdotally, from what we have heard. We don't have any hard data to back it up because nobody releases that information to us. Companies are not very open about their retention data. But what we have seen in companies where we have been for a longer period of time, we have watched people stay longer. And we have seen it in the recruitment process where people actively joined a company because they have heard they could get to pick their own team.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question. That sounded like an obvious next step. So
And
that's really quite interesting.
Yeah, we do exactly see that scenario, people choosing that company because they know they're going to get the chance to choose which team and what technology or what type of work they get to work on. And that is a huge bonus if you think about it, compared to some organizations where you might go through 7 interviews and multiple tests and then just get thrown on something that you don't necessarily think you can learn from or don't want to do. So the idea that it generates quite an attractive proposition is important to the company, I think, and to the people involved.
And
Absolutely.
what we do know is that companies we've worked with, like in New Zealand, that has made a difference for people's choice. When the market was really tight a few years ago, and companies were competing to get people, the ones that had self-selection were more attractive than the ones who didn't. So we had people come and say, I joined your company, I want to join because I get to be picking my own team. And we also very aware that during a recruitment conversation that we can't say, well, you just show up and you just point at the team and you will be part of this. And you get it. But what we can promise is that there will be further self-selection events where you will have the chance and opportunity, like everyone else, to choose who you want to work with and what you want to work on.
And I would imagine if you just first come into a company, you don't have enough context to be able to participate in the self-selection. So that's probably a good thing.
Yes.
Have you ever had a situation where, say, you have 10 projects and you put them all in a room and they start talking to everybody else and all the people and everything else, and they suddenly realize, oh, these two projects aren't that different. Maybe we could merge, or vice versa, a project could split. Because it seems to me that kind of, it's very rare that you get the opportunity to see everything going on all in one room.
Yes. And to me, that's one of the things that are the beauty of self-selection, that you surface so much information, you visualize information, and there's so much you surface. You surface projects that should be merged, projects that should be split. You surface areas where nobody wants to work, and they are usually different from what you think. And you surface areas where many people want to work. So that information is super useful. And I think David came up with the analogy because people are really worried what if we find out nobody wants to work here or do this? It's a bit like not going to the doctor because you fear you are sick. So you actually want this information, and then self-selection doesn't necessarily solve it, but you have the information and you can take measures to solve the problem.
Very interesting.
And
And I would imagine sometimes those measures are to do with helping managers to manage better and this kind of thing too, which is again productive for the company.
yeah, just
Very
having
interesting.
having management decide what those projects or products or whatever it is we're putting on the wall to let people select against is quite a big deal in some places to get to that level of clarity where we can say there are 10 things and this is what they're called and this is the value that each one is hoping to deliver. That seems simple. In some companies that's obvious, but in some it can take months to get to that point, the point where you can then self-select, because it does flip the emphasis onto management and change the conversation from who goes where to what's the most important thing this area needs to do in the upcoming quarter, year, whatever that might look like. So it's a nice shift, and it fits with what you'd probably want to do anyway from a business agility point of view. And if I can add, the other thing that came to mind when we were talking about whether projects could kind of merge or split during the self-selection is we did toy with the idea originally of letting people just organize. So not necessarily having the projects or the products on the wall and just saying, solve some problems, you know what to do and we do. But what we've found is that it's too complex to do the work and the people at the same time. You're making too many decisions on the fly as to who you want to work with and what you want to learn and what the work should look like. And is it a project or a product, and too many trade-offs.
What haven't I asked you that I should ask you?
Can we ask you, Dave? I'd be really interested what your like why you're maybe attracted to this idea. I'm guessing you're a little bit to have published the book, but what you like about it and maybe what you remain skeptical about. I'd be really interested in your take on that, actually. Maybe that might generate a question.
I think my take on this is 100% positive. Back in the 80s, I had a software company in England, and we kind of did the same thing in a way. When a new project started, people would be expected to express interest or not and move across to that project. And so it wasn't a big event where people would have big choices. It would be more dynamic through the actual process of doing projects, and that worked really well. The team that they were moving from always had a veto if it was kind of like, you're going to kill me if you do this. But apart from that, I mean, people seemed to really like that, particularly if they were getting really frustrated doing what they were doing and they could just move away somewhere else. And I think we saw what you see, and that is that people tended to drift towards where they can do the most good. I think one of the things about our industry is that I think people commonly mischaracterize what's important to developers. I think most people who are developers, I think, get their satisfaction from seeing their stuff used, you know, and seeing it delivered, seeing it in the hands of people that, I've created something and then effectively someone's now using it. And that's a really big deal. And I think because of that, then the people would tend to choose things where they felt they had the biggest value. And they would get the most satisfaction. Every now and then they'd choose it because it was the sexiest project. But I mean, that's the way it goes. So no, I think this is a really interesting approach. I think the problem I see with it is making the transition, because as a company grows, if you're like a 5-person company, then you're not doing this. You probably have to be at the kind of like 40, 50 level before it starts to make sense. And so at some point, you're going to have to switch from being the kind of like more rigid teams into the more rock and rolly teams. And that must be a difficult transition to navigate at the same time as you're also navigating all the other growth transitions. But it sounds like you guys have got that nailed. So
Those are actually my favorite companies, like because it's a bit like agile. It's the five of us in the room. We don't need any process. We just talk to each other. And then you're 10 and still kind of okay, and then you are 50. It's got okay. We need to have a little bit of structure, a little bit of process, and then you usually have someone who has worked in a bank and tries to go with this like super bureaucratic process. And I love to catch companies when they're there going, actually, there's something that's a different way. You don't need to turn into an enterprise. You
right.
can actually be agile and work in small teams and just catch them there with things like self-selection and actual agile.
But if I can add, it's really nice to hear you say you were doing this in the 80s, or you'd found a way to get the best out of the people in your company at the time by letting them have at least some choice and method. And I think that raises an important point of we're not claiming to own the idea of people choosing their own teams. We've just come up with a method to make it easier and a method that allows it to happen in different scenarios. But that idea, I think, goes back way further than me and Sandy, and people who especially have been involved in agile ways of working tend to really hook onto it and love that idea. And obviously it should fit really nicely with the idea of a self-organizing team as well. They can self-organize a lot easier because they've self-selected. So it doesn't surprise me that A, you like the idea, but also B, that you'd tried elements of it before. I actually love that. I love that it kind of goes back much further than
Yeah,
our first experiments.
yeah, and that's why we wrote the book, because we want more people to use it, and we want to have to give them a language to talk about it. We want to give them a way to talk to the managers about it. We want to give managers a way to talk to the people about it. We want to give people a method of facilitating basically a how-to, so more people can do it. And basically, yeah, take what people have done in the 80s, what you've done in the 80s, and
Oh,
go,
no.
cool, here's a how-to.
And I think, to be honest with you, that's the thing that I like. I like the fact that the book is, in a way, almost in 3 parts, in that we have kind of like this is what we're trying to do, and then there's a very detailed section on, okay, so how do you actually go about doing it? You know, and lots of examples of how you could have little cards with circles and arrows, and boards with this on them and the pictures and everything else. And when I first read that, I thought, whoa, this is an awful lot of detail for something that's supposed to be agile. But then I thought, no, if I was having to do this, that's what I want. I want a starting place, because I really, unlike you've been doing this for 10 years and you've got the experience to know how it runs. When I do this for the first time, it's do or die, and I got to get it kind of right. And so having a book that actually lays out a framework for doing it, to me, is quite important.
Yeah,
So,
hopefully the method kind of meets people where they're at, because we started the conversation talking about almost like an anxiety or worry about doing this and all the fears and the playground of being left on your own. So one of the reasons, not the only one, but that we've got a method as clearly laid out as it is if you're feeling like that, you probably want something to hook onto. You probably want to be able to look at a picture and go, yes, I could recreate that. And you might not be able to see this through to the nth degree, but just knowing that the first stage is X, and here's where you can start, and here's what the picture needs to look like, tends to give people the confidence to try. And once they've tried, they're away. So some of that level of detail is actually exactly what's needed if people are worried. And like you say, it's do or die maybe. If you're going to bring this into your organization, you're going to be the person who says, let's give this a go. That's brave, for one. And you're somewhat taking a risk to do that. So hopefully the method gives you maybe not full comfort, but more comfort because you can actually see a structure to follow.
right. And it's also like a very, I mean, if you approach this with agility, then what you're doing is saying, okay, this is iteration one. And I'm gonna follow the rules because I'm a novice. I don't know what else to do but follow the rules. But
Absolutely.
then, oh, I got some experience now. Now I can start messing with things and seeing what happens when I change it. So I think, as I say, I think I love the fact that you give people. It's not just arm waving and saying, "Hey, this is a really great idea." You actually give people the tools to try it for themselves. You know.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, you make a really good point because one of the things we asked people when we were interviewing for the book was not just did you follow self-selection, but what did you change? Because we actually both hope that you don't always follow the exact method that we laid out, but that you add to it and you tweak it and you change it. And people have in wonderful ways that we never would have thought of. And we really enjoyed kind of capturing those stories and examples and like a bit like your idea before of randomization, like, great, what would that look like? How could we throw that into the mix? And lots of people have taken the structure, as you say, maybe followed it first time and then gone, right, here's this new tweak and idea, and we've loved seeing those.
Yeah, I mean,
And
in a way, it would almost be a failure if they didn't. You
Yes.
know.
Yeah.
But,
yep. And there wouldn't be a second edition. Like that is
well,
why we have a second edition because people have taken the first edition, they have to a degree followed our ideas, and then they have changed them. And the good thing about writing a book is that people know about you, so they send you nice emails and they contact you and they tell you what they have done. So we got a lot of different ideas and tweaks. And while the core of self-selection has remained the same, there are lots of little tweaks people have made. And also because when we started, that was a company growth where like lots of new people were starting all the time. So so that was the context. Now we have people who use self-selection when companies were shrinking. They had to let go of people different times, and they were shrinking, and they had to reassemble one company as much as every 2 weeks because people were going. There is the restructurings. There is the different contexts. Like people have done that with things like safe and less and just magic agile normal creation, but all different types of contexts and in-person hybrid remote, and all of those people have fed into what we now know about self-selection, which is a lot more than we did 10 years ago.
I'm excited, and I think I'm kind of looking for this to break out into non commercial environments because it strikes me that it's kind of like collective intelligence in a way, you know, and it'd be interesting to see if ever, you know, this makes it into, you know, replacing town council meetings with something more rational. But anyway, well, listen, I have taken a lot of your time, and I've been very selfish and asked a whole bunch of questions just because I'm interested. But I
It's
really
great.
appreciate it. And thank you very much. The book is Creating Great Teams, a second edition, and it is got the cutest cover of any of our books. So that's, if nothing else, the best reason to buy it. But Sandy and David, thank you very much for your time, and well done on that book. Thank you.